The gavel was a crack of bone against dry wood. Soul. The word was a stone dropped into the well of her silence. Alara stood on the rough-hewn platform, the splintery wood biting into the thin soles of her shoes. The sun beat down on the dusty square of redemption, cooking the smell of livestock and nervous sweat from the assembled crowd. She felt their eyes on her, 100 tiny pinpricks of judgment. They were not looking at a person. They were looking at a line item in a ledger of misfortune. Mr. Blackwood, the man who had arranged her disposal, smoothed his waistcoat. His face was a mask of practiced piety, the kind worn by men who sold souls and called it commerce. He had taken her on from the county orphanage with promises of work and a roof. But she had proven too plain, too large, too much of a fixture that gathered dust in the corner of his mercantile. Ranchers came for salt licks and wire, not for a wide-hipped, heavy-footed woman with eyes that saw too much. To Mr. Silas Blackwood of the Broken Rock, the auctioneer bellowed, his voice oiled with satisfaction. He did not mean the Silas Blackwood on the edge of the crowd, the one whose name had just been called. He meant the other one, the one with the money. Alara flinched. Not that one. Anyone but that one. A murmur went through the crowd. Laughter, thin and cruel, pricked at the edges of the afternoon quiet. She saw the smirks on the faces of the ranchers' daughters, girls her own age with ribbons in their hair and easy futures laid out before them like picnic blankets. They saw her as a curiosity, a piece of unfortunate livestock. The fat girl from the orphanage, finally off the town's hands. Her guardian, the man who was not her father but had held that power, stepped forward. His name was Thaddeus Finch, a man whose charity was always an investment. He had fed her and clothed her, and for that, he believed he owned her. He took the pouch of coins from the auctioneer's clerk, his fingers closing around it with a lover's tenderness. He did not look at her. He had never truly looked at her. She was a debt now paid. For a moment, she was nothing but the heat and the dust and the shame. Her whole life had been a series of handoffs, of being passed from one reluctant set of hands to another. The orphanage matron, Mr. Finch, and now this public weighing and measuring, this declaration of her worthlessness. Then something inside her broke, not with a sob, but with a clean, sharp snap. It was the last thread of hope that someone might see her. It was the final, girlish belief that goodness was a currency that could be earned through quiet obedience. It was a lie. She lifted her chin. Her gaze, which had been fixed on a loose board at her feet, swept across the crowd. She met their stares one by one. The laughter faltered. The smirks tightened. She saw not malice, but a deep, unsettling indifference. They were not cruel, not really. They were simply people who had never been forced to stand on a platform and be sold. Her eyes found Thaddeus Finch. He was counting the coins, his lips moving silently. "Was I worth it?" she asked. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the hum of the crowd like a shard of glass. It was rough from disuse, from years of swallowing her words. Finch looked up, startled. His face flushed a dull, angry red. "Be silent, girl. I asked you a question," she said, her voice gaining strength. "The food, the clothes, the space I took up, was that enough to cover it?" A gasp rippled through the townspeople. This was not part of the spectacle. The livestock was not supposed to speak. "You ungrateful whelp," Finch hissed, taking a step toward the platform. "After all I did for you." "You did nothing," Alara said, and the truth of it resonated in her bones. "You housed me like a stray. You fed me scraps, and you waited for the first chance to turn a profit on the county's burden." The words came from a place she did not recognize, a core of iron that had been forged in the cold fires of 1,000 lonely nights. This was not just for her. This was for the girl who cried in the orphanage dormitory, for the child who learned to make herself small, for the young woman who had started to believe the whispers about her own lack of value. Finch's hand twitched as if he wanted to strike her. The auctioneer cleared his throat, a nervous, rumbling sound. The transaction was complete. The entertainment was over. But Alara was not finished. She turned her gaze to the man who had supposedly bought her. She knew of him. Sterling Blackwood, a man who collected things, land, businesses, and pretty, fragile women. He was polished and handsome, his smile a weapon. He was everything she was not. He would break her, not with a fist, but with the slow, grinding pressure of his contempt. She would not go. She took a step back, toward the edge of the platform. The crowd stirred, their indifference curdling into alarm. "I belong to no one," she said, her voice ringing with a clarity that surprised even her. Then, she slipped away, not running, but moving with a deliberate speed that defied anyone to stop her. She pushed through the back of the crowd, ignoring the hands that reached for her, the surprised shouts. She found the narrow alley between the blacksmith's shop and the feed store, a sliver of shadow that smelled of coal dust and old rain. She pressed her back against the rough brick wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The sounds of the square faded, replaced by the frantic drumming of her own heart. She slid down the wall until she was sitting in the dirt, her knees drawn up to her chest. And then the iron core melted. A sob tore from her throat, a raw, animal sound. It was not a cry of self-pity. It was a cry of rage, a cry for the girl who had never been allowed to have a voice. Tears streamed down her face, hot and furious, carving clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. She wept for years of silent meals, of averted gazes, of being a ghost in her own life. She cried until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen shut. She cried until there was nothing left but a hollow, aching emptiness. The sun began to dip below the rooftops, casting long, distorted shadows down the alley. The air grew cooler. Her tears dried into tight, salty tracks on her skin. She pushed herself to her feet, her body stiff and sore. She looked at her hands, raw and chapped from work, but steady. They were good hands, strong hands. They had mended fences, balanced ledgers, and soothed sick animals. They were capable. She was capable. That was the one thing they could not sell. That was the one thing she owned. She wiped her face on the sleeve of her drab dress. She would not cry again. Crying was a luxury. It was a plea for comfort that would never come. In the quiet of the alley, with the smell of coal and decay around her, Elara made a vow. It was not a grand or eloquent promise. It was a simple, brutal piece of engineering, a fence post driven deep into the bedrock of her soul. She would never again place her life in the hands of another. She would never again trust the gentle words of a man, for they were just the bait in a trap. She would rely on herself, her hands, her mind. She would build her own walls, and she would live inside them. Alone. It was not a wish for happiness. It was a plan for survival. She had come to redemption as a ward. She would leave it as something else. She did not have a name for it yet, but she knew it would be her own. A pair of worn leather boots appeared at the mouth of the alley. They were dusty and scuffed, the kind of boots that knew the land. They stopped, silent and patient. Alara's heart seized. They had found her, Sterling Blackwood's men. She straightened her spine, preparing for a fight or a flight she knew she could not win. She would not beg. She would not plead. A voice, low and calm, broke the silence. "Miss." It was not the voice she expected. It was not Sterling's slick tenor or the auctioneer's booming baritone. This voice was rougher, like gravel washed in a slow-moving river. She looked up. The man standing there was tall and broad-shouldered, but he held himself with a stillness that seemed to take up less space than he should. His face was weathered, carved by sun and wind into a map of quiet hardship. His eyes, a startlingly clear blue, were not predatory. They were assessing. He looked at her the way a man looks at a fence that needs mending, calculating what was required without immediate judgment. This was the other Blackwood, Silas, the one with the failing ranch on the edge of the county, the one they whispered about, the man who had turned down every eligible daughter from every prosperous family. "They said you were sold to Sterling Blackwood," he said. It was a statement, not question. Alara's throat was tight. "I'm not a parcel to be delivered." A flicker of something, surprise, maybe respect, passed through his eyes. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod. "No, you are not." He took off his hat, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that was so unexpected it felt like a blow. He held it in his hands, turning the brim. The auctioneer made a mistake. He called the wrong name. She stared at him, suspicion coiling in her gut. This was a trick, a different kind of trap. My bid was for the debt owed to Mr. Finch, he continued, his gaze steady. Not for you. What's the difference? She shot back, her voice sharp with disbelief. The difference, he said slowly, as if choosing each word with immense care, is that a debt can be owned. A person cannot. He fell silent, letting the words hang in the space between them. He did not smile. He did not try to soothe her. He simply stated his truth and waited for her to examine it. Alara's mind raced, searching for the angle of the lie. Men like him did not exist in her world. Men with power used it. Men with money bought what they wanted. Kindness was a currency used to purchase something later. Why? She asked, the word a raw whisper. Why would you do that? Finch was going to sell you to the logging camps up north if Sterling's bid fell through, he said, his voice flat, matter of fact. No woman belongs in those camps. He looked past her down the grimy alley. I have a ranch, the Broken Rock. It's in need of hands. I'm offering you a position, wages, a room of your own. You can leave any time you want. The debt to Finch is settled. You owe me nothing. She stared at him, speechless. A room of her own, wages, the freedom to leave. These were concepts so foreign they sounded like a language she had never learned. It had to be a lie, a more elaborate cage. I don't trust you, she said, the words of her vow still fresh on her tongue. I don't trust any man. He met her gaze without flinching. Good, he said. Don't. Trust is earned. I'm not asking for yours. I'm offering you a choice. You can stay here in this alley, or you can come with me and have a roof over your head tonight. He put his hat back on. My wagon is at the end of the street. I'll wait 10 minutes. He turned and walked away, his footsteps steady and unhurried. He did not look back. Alara stood alone in the gathering dark. The choice was a lie. There was no choice. Staying here meant Sterling Blackwood would find her. Or worse. But going with him felt like breaking her vow before it had even had a chance to set. Her stomach growled, a fierce, cramping pain. She had not eaten since the morning, a piece of dry bread she had choked down while her stomach churned with dread. Shame washed over her, hot and familiar. She was always hungry. Her body, large and sturdy, required fuel, and it had always been a source of quiet humiliation. At the orphanage, extra food was a sin. At Finch's, it was an expense to be noted and criticized. She walked to the mouth of the alley. His wagon was there, a simple, sturdy buckboard hitched to a pair of rangy-looking horses. He was standing beside it, not looking in her direction, but staring out at the darkening plains as if he had all the time in the world. She walked toward him, each step a battle between her desperation and her distrust. He heard her approach, but did not turn until she was a few feet away. His expression was unreadable. I'll work, she said, her voice stiff. But I take no charity, and I will have a lock on my door. He nodded once. The room has a lock and a key. He gestured to the wagon bed, then seemed to think better of it. He walked to the front and offered her a hand up to the seat. She ignored it, climbing up by herself, her movements clumsy but strong. He showed no reaction, simply walking around to the other side and taking the reins. The wagon lurched into motion, the wheels crunching over the dusty street. They left the lights of redemption behind, plunging into the vast, open darkness of the prairie. The silence between them was thick and heavy, broken only by the creak of the wagon and the plodding of the horses. Alara sat ramrod straight, her hands clenched in her lap. She was a prisoner, she told herself. This was just a different kind of cell, one with wheels. She watched him from the corner of her eye. He seemed utterly absorbed in the task of driving, his profile a rugged silhouette against the twilight sky. After they had traveled for what felt like an hour, he spoke again, his voice startling her. Are you hungry? The question was so simple, so direct, it disarmed her. It was not a judgment. It was not an accusation. It was a question about a basic human need. I'm fine, she lied, the word catching her throat. He did not press. He simply reached behind the seat, and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. He held it out to her. "My supper," he said. "I'm not hungry." She stared at the bundle. It was a lie, she knew. She could see the fatigue in the lines around his eyes. A man who worked the land was always hungry. This was a test, or a trick. But the smell of baked bread and roasted meat wafted from the cloth, and her stomach betrayed her with another painful growl. Her hands trembled as she reached out and took it. The cloth was still warm. "Thank you," she mumbled, the words feeling foreign and rusty. He just nodded, his eyes on the trail ahead. She unwrapped the bundle in her lap. Inside was half a loaf of dark bread and 2 thick slices of cold beef. It was more food than she was usually allowed for a full day's meals. She waited for him to say something, to watch her, to comment on her appetite. He did not. He kept his gaze fixed on the horizon, giving her the privacy of his attention elsewhere. Hesitantly, she took a bite of the bread. It was dense and hearty. She ate slowly at first, then with a growing, desperate hunger. She devoured the bread and the meat, every last crumb. It was the best meal she had ever had, not because of the food itself, but because it was given without condition and eaten without shame. When she was finished, she folded the cloth neatly and placed it on the seat between them. A strange warmth spread through her, a heat that had nothing to do with the food. It was the shock of unexpected, non-transactional kindness. It felt dangerous. It felt like a crack in the wall she had just built around her heart. She had to be careful. This man, Silas Blackwood, was a puzzle, and she had learned the hard way that puzzles were just pretty boxes that held traps. Ja! The Broken Rock Ranch was not a place of beauty. It was a place of grim determination. They arrived well after midnight, under a sky littered with cold, indifferent stars. The homestead was a collection of stark, angular buildings huddled against the vast emptiness of the plains. The main house was small and unadorned, its windows dark. The barn sagged slightly to one side, like an old man with a bad hip. Fences were patched with mismatched wood and wire. The place felt tired. It felt like it was losing a long, slow fight. It felt, to Alara, strangely familiar. Silas pulled the wagon to a halt near the house. "The kitchen door is unlocked," he said, his voice low in the quiet night. He pointed to a small, separate building near the back of the main house. "That's your room." It was the original homestead cabin. "The key is on the inside of the door." He swung down from the wagon and began unhitching the horses, his movements economical and weary. He did not watch her. He did not issue any further instructions. He had given her a destination and the means to secure it. The rest was up to her. Alara slid down from her seat, her legs stiff. She walked to the small cabin, her footsteps loud on the hard-packed earth. The door was made of thick, weathered planks. She pushed it open. It swung inward with a low groan. The room was small and spare. It held a narrow bed with a patched quilt, a small wooden table with a wash basin and pitcher, and a single chair. It was clean. The air smelled of dried herbs and old wood, not of dust or decay. And there, just as he had promised, was a heavy iron key hanging from a nail on the inside of the door. She stepped inside and closed the door. She turned the key in the lock. The click of the bolt sliding home was the loudest sound she had ever heard. It was the sound of safety, a small, temporary but real pocket of it. She leaned her forehead against the cool wood of the door, her entire body trembling with exhaustion. For the first time in her life, she was in a room that was hers behind a door that she controlled. She could not remember the last time she had slept without the fear of being watched or woken. She did not undress. She simply crossed the small room, lay down on the bed, and pulled the quilt over her. The mattress was stuffed with straw, but it felt like a feather bed. She was asleep before she could even begin to build up her walls of suspicion again. She woke to the gray light of dawn filtering through the single small window. For a moment, she did not know where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The auction, the alley, the silent man with the assessing eyes. Her first instinct was fear. Her second was to check the door. It was still locked. A strange feeling settled over her. Not relief, exactly. More like a cautious curiosity. Phase 1 of the trick was complete. He had given her what he promised. Now she had to wait for phase 2, the part where the price was revealed. She rose and poured water from the pitcher into the basin. It was cool and clean. She washed her face and hands, trying to scrub away the grime and shame of the day before. She looked at her reflection in the small, cracked mirror hanging on the wall. A stranger looked back at her. A plain, large-boned woman with tired eyes and a stubborn set to her jaw. The girl from the orphanage was gone. She had work to do. He had offered her a position, wages. That meant she had to prove her worth. It was a language she understood. Work was transactional. You performed a task, you received payment. There was no emotion in it. No trust required. She unlocked her door and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp and smelled of dust and distant rain. The ranch looked even more worn in the daylight. Weeds choked the small garden patch near the house. A piece of machinery, a water pump, by the looks of it, lay partially dismantled near the well, its metal guts exposed to the elements. Silas was nowhere in sight. A thin plume of smoke rose from the chimney of the main house. She walked to the kitchen door and hesitated. This was his space. Entering it felt like a trespass. But if she was to work here, this was where she had to begin. She knocked softly. There was no answer. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The kitchen was a disaster. It was the kitchen of a man who did not see mess, only function. Dirty dishes were piled in a dry sink. A film of grease covered the wood-burning stove. The floor was gritty with tracked-in dirt. An old man sat at the table, nursing a mug of coffee. He was wiry and weathered, his face a road map of wrinkles. He watched her enter with shrewd, narrowed eyes. "He said you'd be coming," the old man said, his voice a dry rasp. He did not introduce himself. "I'm here to work," Alara said, her gaze sweeping over the chaos of the room. This, she understood. This was a system in a state of collapse. This was a problem she could solve. Without another word, she rolled up her sleeves. She found a bar of lye soap and a scrubbing brush. She started with the stove, scraping away weeks, maybe months, of accumulated grease and soot. The old man watched her, silent, for a full hour. He never offered to help. He just watched, his gaze intense and analytical. She worked with a methodical fury. She heated water. She scrubbed the dishes until they squeaked. She scoured the countertops and swept the floor. She did not work for his approval or for Silas's. She worked because the chaos of a room offended the sense of order that was the only thing she truly possessed. She was imposing her will on this small corner of the world, making it right. By midday, the kitchen was transformed. It was clean. It was organized. It was functional. The old man, who she would later learn was named Jed, the ranch foreman, had not moved from his chair. He had watched her every move. When she was finally finished, wiping her hands on a clean rag, he took a slow sip of his now-cold coffee. "Ah," he said. It was a single, grudging syllable of acknowledgement. In the economy of Jed's speech, it was a verbose compliment. Just then, Silas walked in. He stopped in the doorway, his gaze sweeping over the gleaming kitchen. He looked at the clean stove, the tidy counters, the clear floor. His eyes then moved to Alara, standing by the sink. He looked surprised, genuinely so. He started, then stopped. He looked around again, as if to make sure he was in the right house. He finally looked back at her. "Thank you. I expect to be paid for my work," she said, her voice flat. She would not accept gratitude. Gratitude was a debt. Wages were transaction. A flicker of a smile touched his lips, so fleeting she thought she might have imagined it. "Of course," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. He took out 2 coins and placed them on the table. "Is that fair for a morning's work?" It was more than fair. It was generous. She picked up the coins. They were heavy and real in her palm. The first money she had ever earned that was truly her own. She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Supper is at sundown," he said. "Jed will show you where the pantry is." He turned and left, leaving her alone with the old man again. Jed pushed himself up from the table. "Pantry's this way," he grunted, already moving toward a door in the corner. He did not seem to care if she followed. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Alara took over the running of the house. She cooked, She cleaned, she mended. She brought order to the domestic chaos of the broken rock. She demanded payment every day, and every day Silas paid her without comment. He and Jed and the two young ranch hands, little more than boys, would eat the meal she prepared in near total silence. Sometimes one of the young hands, a boy named Finn, would mumble, "Thanks, ma'am." But the highest praise ever came from Silas. After a particularly good meal of rabbit stew and fresh-baked bread, he had pushed his plate back, looked at her for a long moment, and said, "Supper was good." The words landed with the weight of a lengthy speech. Alara felt a blush creep up her neck and was furious at herself for it. It was just food. It was just a job. But she was beginning to see the ranch not just as a place of employment, but as a living thing. She watched Silas and Jed struggle. They were good horsemen, good cattlemen. They knew the land, but they were fighting a losing battle. Equipment failed. Fences broke. And there was a deep weariness in Silas that seemed to have settled into the very soil of the place. The land itself was the biggest problem. The creek that watered the north pasture had slowed to a trickle. The grass there was turning brown and brittle. Silas and Jed had spent days trying to clear what they assumed was a blockage upstream, with no success. One afternoon, Alara walked out to where they were working. They stood waist-deep in the sluggish creek, their faces grim with frustration. "It's no good," Silas said, throwing a shovel full of mud onto the bank. "We clear a section, and it just slows down again further up." Alara stood on the bank, her hands on her hips, and just looked. She did not look at the water. She looked at the land around it. She had learned to read the land at the orphanage, not from books, but from the old groundskeeper who had taught her how to see the way water wanted to move, how the roots of trees held the soil, how the slope of a hill told a story. "You're digging the wrong place," she said quietly. Both men froze and looked at her. Jed's expression was one of pure skepticism. Silas's was curious. "What do you mean?" Silas asked, wading out of the water. She pointed to a line of cottonwood trees about 50 yards upstream, on the other side of a low rise. "The creek doesn't want to run this way anymore. The ground has shifted. See how the land sinks over there? That's the new low point. The main channel is trying to divert itself underground through the gravel bed beneath those trees." Jed snorted. "That's ridiculous. This creek has run this way for 100 years. The land doesn't care about 100 years, Alara said simply. It only cares about today." Silas was not looking at the creek anymore. He was looking at her. That assessing gaze was back, but this time it held a new intensity. He was seeing something more than a housekeeper. "Show me," he said. She led them over the rise. The ground on the other side was soft and damp, though there was no visible water. "Dig here," she said, pointing to a spot at the base of the largest cottonwood. Jed looked at Silas, shaking his head. It was a fool's errand, but Silas just picked up his shovel. "Dig," he said to Jed. Grumbling, Jed joined him. They dug. For 10 minutes, there was nothing but dirt and rocks. Jed shot Alara a triumphant, sour look. "Keep digging," she said, her voice steady. They dug for another 5 minutes. And then Silas's shovel hit something that wasn't rock. It was wet mud. A moment later, a small trickle of water seeped into the bottom of the hole. They dug faster, and the trickle became a gush. They had tapped directly into the diverted underground flow. They worked for the rest of the day, digging a new, wide channel to redirect the water back into the old creek bed below the blockage. By sundown, the creek was running full and clear again, flowing toward the thirsty north pasture. Silas and Jed stood on the bank, covered in mud, watching the life-giving water. Jed just kept shaking his head, a look of stunned disbelief on his face. Silas turned to Alara. He was exhausted, but his eyes were bright with a kind of energy she had not seen in him before. "How did you know?" he asked. "I look at things," she said. "I see how they fit together, or how they're broken." He stared at her for a long, silent moment. The sun was setting behind him, casting his face in shadow, but she could feel the weight of his gaze. He was not looking at her plain face or her large frame. He was looking at her mind. It was the first time in her life she had ever felt truly seen. "What else can you do?" he asked, his voice quiet with a dawning sense of wonder. The question was a key, turning a lock deep inside her. For years, her skills had been things to be hidden, things that made her strange. The way she could fix a clock, or calculate figures in her head, or understand the geometry of a failing roof. They were parts of her she had learned to keep quiet. "I can read," she said, "and I'm good with numbers." It was a massive understatement. She could read a ledger book like a story, seeing the narrative of profit and loss, of foolish choices and hidden costs. Finch had used her for years to keep his accounts, a secret she had never been allowed to share. Silas just nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Come to the house after you've washed up," he said. "There's something I want you to look at." Vougier. Later that evening, she found him in the small, cluttered room he used as an office. A single lantern cast a pool of yellow light on a desk buried under stacks of paper. He was staring at a large, leather-bound ledger, his brow furrowed in frustration. "These are the ranch accounts," he said without preamble, gesturing to the book. "They go back 5 years. My father kept them before me. He was a good cattleman, but not a good bookkeeper. And I'm worse." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure exhaustion. "We should be profitable. The herds are good. The land is good. But every year, we fall a little further behind. We're bleeding, and I can't find the wound." He looked at her, his blue eyes stark in the lantern light. "You said you're good with numbers. Find it. Find where the money is going." This was a test far greater than a dirty kitchen or a dry creek. He was handing her the financial soul of his ranch, the intimate record of his family struggle. He was trusting her, not with his kindness, but with his vulnerability. The vow she had made in the alley screamed in her mind. Do not trust. Do not engage. But the challenge, the problem, it called to her. A system that was broken. A puzzle waiting to be solved. "I'll need all the books," she said, her voice betraying none of her internal conflict. "And the receipts. And the bank statements." For the next 3 days, Alara did not cook. She did not clean. She barely slept. She locked herself in the office with the books. Jed grumbled about the cold meals, but Silas told him to be quiet. She spread the ledgers across the floor, creating a timeline. She laid out the receipts from the suppliers, the statements from the bank, the bills of sale for cattle. At first, it was just a sea of numbers, a testament to sloppy, hopeful accounting. But then she began to see the patterns. It started with the price of feed. It was consistently 10% higher than the quotes from neighboring ranches. Then she saw the invoices for fence wire. The Broken Rock was paying for twice the amount of wire they could have possibly used in a year. The numbers were inflated, subtly at first, then more boldly. And then she found the name. It appeared on the invoices from the feed supplier in redemption. It appeared on the bills for the wire. It appeared on the statements for veterinary supplies. A signature, neat and precise, authorizing the payments on behalf of the Broken Rock. Sterling Blackwood, Silas's cousin, the man who had tried to buy her. A cold knot formed in her stomach. This was not just a wound. This was a deliberate, calculated exsanguination. Sterling had been bleeding his cousin's ranch dry for years. She cross-referenced the cattle sales. The records showed healthy numbers of calves sold at market each year. But the bank deposits were consistently short. Thousands of dollars over 5 years had simply vanished between the sale yard and the bank. The deposit slips were all in Sterling's hand. He had been handling the town side of the business for Silas, a gesture of familial help, a gesture of profound betrayal. On the third night, she found the final piece. It was a map of the county, tucked into the back of an old ledger. It showed the property lines. The Broken Rock was a large holding, but it was landlocked on 3 sides. The fourth side, the only access to the river and the easiest route to the railhead, was a narrow strip of land. According to the deed record she had found, that strip of land belonged to Silas. But on this map, it was marked with a different color. A note in the margin, in a fine, elegant script she now recognized, read, "Easement expires year of our Lord 1889. This year, Sterling was not just stealing from Silas. He was trying to bankrupt him. He was strangling the ranch, waiting for the moment when Silas would be forced to sell. And Sterling, with his pockets full of the money he had stolen from the ranch itself, would be the only buyer. He wanted the land. All of it. Alara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. This was a man who played a long, patient, and utterly ruthless game. And she, by fixing the creek, by starting to bring order to the chaos, had just appeared on his board as an unexpected and unwelcome new piece. She gathered the papers, her hands steady. She had the proof. She found Silas in the barn, mending a harness by lantern light. He worked with a quiet focus, his hands strong and sure. "It's Sterling," she said, her voice flat. He did not stop his work. He did not even look up, but she saw his knuckles go white where he gripped the leather. "Tell me," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. She laid it all out for him. The inflated invoices, the stolen cattle money, the map, the expiring easement. She spoke calmly, presenting the facts as if she were reading a weather report. She gave him the numbers, the dates, the names. She gave him the irrefutable mathematics of his cousin's betrayal. When she was finished, a heavy silence filled the barn. The only sound was the nervous stamp of a horse in its stall. Silas slowly put down the harness. He stood up. His face, in the flickering lantern light, was a mask of cold fury. He was a man who had been pushed too far, a quiet man whose anger, once roused, was a terrible thing to behold. "I'm going into town," he said, his voice a low growl. Alara knew what that meant. He was going to confront Sterling. It would be a fight, a public, brutal, and ultimately useless fight. Sterling, with his money and his influence, would twist it. He would paint Silas as a desperate, violent man. It was what he wanted. "No," she said. Silas turned to her, his eyes blazing. "He has been robbing me. He has been laughing at me for years. And if you go in there and hit him, you will prove him right," she said, her voice firm. "He wants you to be angry. He wants you to be violent. That's a fight you can't win. So I'm supposed to do nothing," he demanded, his voice rising. "Let him take everything my father built." "No," she said, stepping closer. "You're supposed to be smart. You're supposed to be patient. You let him think his plan is working. You let him get comfortable, and you gather the evidence to destroy him." He stared at her, his anger warring with the cold logic of her words. Just then, the sound of an approaching carriage reached them from the road. It was a fine, handsome carriage, pulled by a pair of perfectly matched gray horses. It rolled to a stop in front of the house, and a man stepped out. He was dressed in a tailored suit, his boots polished to a mirror shine. He moved with an easy grace, an air of ownership. It was Sterling Blackwood. He walked toward the barn, a charming smile on his face. "Silas, cousin, I was just passing by. Thought I'd see how you were faring." His eyes swept past Silas and landed on Alara. The smile tightened almost imperceptibly. He recognized her. His gaze flickered over her plain dress, her work-roughened hands. A look of amused contempt crossed his face. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Look what the cat dragged in. I heard Finch had finally managed to offload his prize heifer. I didn't realize she'd ended up here." He was looking at Alara, but the insult was aimed at Silas. A way of saying, "This is the best you can do? This is what you surround yourself with." Alara felt the old shame rise in her, hot and suffocating. She was the fat girl on the auction block again, the object of ridicule. She saw Silas take a half-step forward, his hands clenched into fists. She saw the flash of triumph in Sterling's eyes. He had drawn first blood. He was controlling the game. Before Silas could speak, before he could throw the punch that would ruin everything, Alara stepped in front of him. She met Sterling's mocking gaze with a look of cool indifference. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice even. "You're just in time. We were just discussing the ranch's finances. Perhaps you could clarify a few things for us." The smile vanished from Sterling's face. It was replaced by a look of sharp, sudden calculation. He had come expecting to find a dumb animal. He had found a strategist instead. The game had changed, and he knew it. Chug. Sterling recovered his composure in an instant. The charming smile slid back into place, but did not reach his eyes. His eyes were cold, watchful. "Finances?" he said with a light laugh. "My dear girl, I wouldn't trouble your pretty head with such things. That's man's work, He turned his attention back to Silas, dismissing her completely. "Cousin, is this what you've been reduced to? Taking financial advice from the help." The insult was designed to drive a wedge between them, to remind Silas of her lowly status. But Silas did not take the bait. He looked from Sterling to Alara, and a new kind of understanding dawned in his eyes. He was seeing the shape of the fight she had described, the quiet, patient war. "Alara is helping me organize the books," Silas said, his voice calm, betraying none of the rage she knew was simmering just beneath the surface. "She's very thorough." The emphasis on the word thorough was not lost on Sterling. A flicker of unease crossed his face. "Is she now?" Sterling said smoothly. "Well, I'm sure her talents are considerable." The innuendo was thick and ugly. He was trying to cast her as Silas's mistress, to poison the well of public opinion before they had even begun to fight. "Her talent," Silas said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low register, "is for finding things that are out of place." The two men stared at each other, the air crackling with unspoken accusations. Sterling held the social power, the money, the influence. Silas had only the truth and the quiet, underestimated woman standing beside him. "Well, I mustn't keep you," Sterling said, his smile becoming a tight, humorless line. "Just wanted to stop in. I'll be in touch about that easement issue. I'm sure we can come to some mutually beneficial arrangement." It was a veiled threat, a reminder of the legal dagger he held poised over the ranch's heart. He turned and walked back to his fine carriage, his posture radiating confidence. But Alara saw the way his shoulders were tensed. He was worried. She had surprised him. That was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. As the carriage rolled away, Silas turned to her. The fury was gone from his face, replaced by a grim resolve. "You were right," he said. "A fist fight would have been a fool's game." He looked at her, his expression one of dawning respect. "He underestimated you." "Everyone does," she said. It was not a complaint. It was a statement of fact. And for the first time, she realized it was not a weakness. It was a weapon. "So what do we do now?" he asked. The word hung in the air between them. "We." It was the first time he had used it. It was an acknowledgement of their partnership. It was the sound of a foundation being laid. "Now," she said, "we let him think he's winning, and we gather the rope to hang him with." She looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "We need to know who he's paid in town. The county clerk, the bank manager. We need copies of every fraudulent invoice. We need sworn statement from the men he cheated at the cattle auctions. We need to build a case so solid that not even his money can buy him out of it." She was no longer just the housekeeper. She was the general. Silas listened, his expression intent. He did not question her. He did not doubt her. He simply nodded. "I know a man who used to work the stockyards. He always said Sterling's counts were creative." "Talk to him," she said. "But be careful. Sterling has eyes and ears everywhere." "And you?" he asked. "I'm going to go over these books again," she said. "Every line, every number. He's arrogant. I guarantee you he made more mistakes." Their alliance was sealed not with a handshake, but with a shared look of grim purpose in the dusty half-light of the barn. As she had predicted, Sterling did not wait long to escalate. The rumors started within a week. They spread through redemption like a grass fire, whispered over store counters and in the church pews. The fat girl from the orphanage was living at the Broken Rock. Not as a housekeeper, they said, but as Silas Blackwood's whore. He had bought her at auction, and now he was keeping her. It was a scandal. It explained why he had turned down all the proper, respectable daughters of the valley. He had a taste for damaged goods. Alara heard the whispers when she went into town for supplies. The storekeeper's wife, who had once been polite, now refused to meet her eyes. The ranchers who had nodded to her now turned their backs. The women of the town looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. Each averted gaze, each hushed conversation that stopped when she drew near, was a fresh cut. It brought back the shame of the platform, the feeling of being judged and found wanting. Her vow of self-reliance was no shield against this kind of attack. It was designed to poison Silas's reputation and to drive her away. She returned to the ranch with her jaw tight, her face a pale mask. Silas saw it the moment she drove the wagon into the yard. "What is it?" he asked. "Nothing," she said, her voice brittle. He took the reins from her hands. "Alara, what is it?" She finally looked at him, her eyes flashing with a helpless anger. "They're talking. About you. About me. Sterling is telling them lies." "I know," he said quietly. "You know. Jed heard it in town 2 days ago," he said. "I told him to say nothing to you." "Why?" she demanded. "Because you thought I was too weak to hear it." "No," he said, his gaze steady and serious. "Because it's a lie, and I didn't want to give it the dignity of a conversation." He paused. "Does it bother you? What they say?" "Of course it bothers me," she cried, the words bursting out of her. "They're looking at me like I'm dirt. Like I'm what he said I was." "They're fools," he said simply. "They see what Sterling wants them to see." He looked at her, and his expression was not one of pity, but of a fierce, protective anger. "He's doing this to hurt you, to make you run. Don't give him the satisfaction." His words were a balm on the raw wound of her pride. He was not defending himself. He was defending her. But Sterling's attacks were not limited to rumors. A few nights later, they woke to the smell of smoke. A fire had been set in the south pasture, the one closest to the road. It was small, and they managed to beat it out before it did much damage, but the message was clear. It was a warning shot. Then, 2 of their best horses fell ill. The vet came out and confirmed it. They had been poisoned. One died. The other, Silas's own mount, was saved only by Alara's round-the-clock nursing, using remedies the old orphanage groundskeeper had taught her. The pressure mounted. A letter arrived from the county, a formal notice that the easement providing access to the river would be reviewed at a public hearing in 1 month's time. A petition had been filed by a concerned citizen, Sterling, of course, arguing that the right-of-way had been abandoned and should revert to public domain to be auctioned to the highest bidder. The ranch was under siege. The financial strain was immense. The emotional toll was worse. The 2 young hands grew nervous. Their families in town were hearing the rumors. One of them, the boy named Finn, came to Silas, his hat in his hands. "My pa says I should quit, Mr. Blackwood," he said, his voice miserable. "He says there's trouble here." "Your pa is right," Silas said, his voice heavy. "There's trouble, but I'll not hold it against you if you go." Finn looked at Alara, who was standing on the porch. He looked at the clean kitchen, remembered the good meals, the way she had mended his favorite shirt without being asked. "No, sir," he said, straightening up. "I ain't a quitter. I am staying." It was a small act of loyalty, but it felt monumental. Despite these small moments of solidarity, the constant pressure began to wear on Alara. Sterling's strategy was insidious. He had identified her deepest insecurity, her belief in her own worthlessness, her fear that she was a burden, and he was exploiting it with surgical precision. She started to believe the rumors were true, not the lies about her being his whore, but the underlying premise. She was the source of the trouble. Before she came, Silas had been struggling, but he had been left alone. Now, because of her, he was being targeted, his livelihood destroyed. The thought took root in her mind and festered. She was a curse. Everywhere she went, she brought misfortune. She had brought it on Finch, who had been forced to sell her at a loss. Now she was bringing it on Silas, the one man who had shown her a measure of decency. The only way to save him was to leave. The decision settled in her heart like a cold stone. It was the only logical, honorable thing to do. She would disappear. She would go somewhere no one knew her, take a new name, and live the solitary life she had vowed to live. It was what she deserved. One evening, she overheard Jed talking to Silas by the corral. She was hidden in the shadows of the barn, and they did not know she was there. "You can't keep her here, Silas," Jed said, his voice low and troubled. "It ain't right. That snake Sterling is using her to ruin you. The whole town thinks you've lost your mind. They're laughing at you." Silas was silent for a long time. Alara held her breath, her heart pounding. "Let them laugh," Silas said finally, his voice hard as iron. "She's worth more than the whole damn town put together. She stays." Alara shrank back into the shadows, a wave of guilt and misery washing over her. He was defending her. He was choosing to go down with the ship because of her. She could not let him. His loyalty was a burden she could not bear. That night, she made her plan. She packed her few belongings, a spare dress, the coin she had earned, into a small bundle. She wrote a short, simple note and left it on the kitchen table. "Thank you. I am sorry." She would wait until the house was dark and quiet, then slip away. She would walk the 20 miles to the next county where no one knew her name. As she stood in her small cabin, her bundle in her hand, a flicker of orange light caught her eye through the window. It was too bright to be a lantern. A shout from outside confirmed her fear. "Fire! The barn's on fire!" She threw open her door. The main barn, the heart of the ranch, was engulfed in flames. The fire was roaring, devouring the dry old wood with a terrifying hunger. Silas and Jed were already running toward it with buckets, their shouts swallowed by the noise. This was it, Sterling's final, most destructive act. Alara dropped her bundle and ran, not away from the ranch, but toward the fire. Her plan to leave was forgotten, burned away by the immediate, overwhelming crisis. As she got closer, she saw the young hand, Finn, silhouetted in the open barn door, trying to lead the terrified horses out. But a burning beam crashed down, blocking the main entrance. He was trapped inside. "Fiend!" Silas roared, his face a mask of horror. He ran toward the blocked entrance, ready to plunge into the inferno. Jed grabbed his arm. "You'll never make it," the old man yelled over the roar of the flames. "It's a death trap. There's a back door," Alara screamed, pointing to the far side of the barn, the one near the tack room. Silas looked at her, then at the fire. The roof was beginning to groan, ready to collapse. To go in was almost certain death. To do nothing was to let the boy die. Without a second's hesitation, he ran for the back of the barn. Alara watched him disappear into the smoke. Her heart stopped. This was her fault. All of it. Her decision to stay, to fight, had led to this. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The roar of the fire was deafening. The heat was so intense, it seared her skin even from 100 feet away. Then, out of the billowing smoke on the far side, two figures stumbled into the clear. It was Silas, half carrying a choking, sobbing Finn. He had gotten him out. He had unhesitatingly chosen to save a life, even if it meant losing everything else. Just as they cleared the building, the roof of the barn gave way with a deafening crash, sending a shower of sparks and embers into the night sky. The barn, the winter hay, the tools, the harnesses, everything was gone. Silas laid Finn gently on the ground, away from the heat. The boy was alive, coughing but alive. Silas stood up and looked at the ruin of his ranch. His face, illuminated by the hellish glow, was a study in devastation. He had won the battle for the boy's life, but he had lost the war for his livelihood. He turned and his eyes found Alara. He walked toward her, his steps heavy. He stopped in front of her. He had seen the bundle she had dropped near her cabin door. He knew. "You were leaving?" he said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of profound hurt. Tears streamed down Alara's face, mixing with the soot and ash. "To save you," she whispered. "I'm the reason he's doing this. I'm a curse." "No," he said, his voice rough with emotion. He reached out and gripped her arms, his hold firm but not harsh. He made her look at him. "You are the only reason this ranch has survived this long. You're the only reason I have any fight left in me at all." He shook his head, his eyes burning with an intensity that stripped away all her defenses. "He didn't do this because of you. He did this because of me. Because he's a thief and a coward, and he can't stand to see a man build something he can't steal." He pulled her closer, his voice dropping to a raw, ragged whisper. "Don't you dare leave. Don't you dare let him win. We fight this. Together." She stared at him, at the soot on his face, the desperation in his eyes, the unwavering belief he was placing in her. Her vow to be alone, her plan for survival, it all crumbled into dust. It was a miserable, lonely plan. This was better. This fight, this man, this place. "Together," she said, her voice clear and strong. The barn burned behind them, a funeral pyre for the old life. In its destructive light, a new one was being forged. Effet, the fire gutted the heart of the broken rock, but it did not break its spirit. In the gray, smoky dawn, the four of them stood before the smoldering ruins. Silas, Jed, Finn, and Alara. What was left of their small army? The barn was a blackened skeleton. The winter hay supply, essential for the herd's survival, was a mountain of ash. Most of the tack and equipment had been devoured by the flames. It was a catastrophic loss, the kind that would force most ranchers to sell their stock and walk away. Finn, his face streaked with soot and tears, looked at Silas. "I am sorry, Mr. Blackwood. I should have been faster." "You have nothing to be sorry for, son," Silas said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. His voice was steady, but Alara could see the deep lines of exhaustion and despair carved into his face. "You're alive. That's all that matters." Jed kicked at a charred beam, his expression grim. "Well, that's it then. We can't get the herd through winter without hay. We'll have to sell them off. What's left of them?" Selling the herd was selling the ranch. It was admitting defeat. It was handing Sterling the victory he had so ruthlessly engineered. Silas stared into the smoking ruins, his jaw tight. Alara could see the fight draining out of him, replaced by a bleak resignation. The fire had not just destroyed a building, it had destroyed his hope. "No," Alara said. The three men turned to look at her. "We are not selling anything," she said, her voice ringing with a conviction that surprised them all, including herself. "That's what he wants. Girl, are you blind?" Jed rasped, gesturing at the devastation. "It's over." "It's not over until the hearing," she countered, her gaze fixed on Silas. "The easement. That's the final move. If he gets that, he controls our access to the river and the rail line. Then we are truly finished. But until then, we are still in the fight." "Fight with what?" Jed demanded. "Harsh language? We have nothing left." "We have the truth," she said. "And we have the books." She turned to Silas, her eyes pleading with him to believe. "He made a mistake. The fire. It was an act of desperation. He's afraid of what we know. He's trying to force your hand before the hearing. We can't let him." A flicker of the old fire returned to Silas's eyes. He looked at her, at the unwavering strength in her face. He looked at the ruins of his father's barn, and he made a choice. "Jed," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "take Finn into town. See what lumber we can get on credit. We'll build a shelter for what's left of the tack. We'll find a way to get hay. We hold on. Until the hearing." Jed stared at him, then at Alara, then back at Silas. He shook his head, a slow, grudging admiration in his eyes. "You're both crazy," he muttered, but he turned and clapped Finn on the back. "Come on, boy. Let's go see who our friends are." As they left, Silas turned to Alara. They were alone in the ruins. "Thank you," he said simply. "We don't have time for thanks," she said, her mind already racing. "The hearing is in 2 weeks. We need to be ready. I need to go to the county seat, the Hall of Records. I need the original survey maps. And I need to talk to the man you know, the one from the stockyards." "It's too dangerous for you to go alone," he said. "It's more dangerous for you," she countered. "Sterling will be watching you. He won't be watching me. Not in the same way. He thinks I'm just a woman who keeps your house. Let him keep thinking that." He argued, but she was resolute. In the end, he agreed, his reluctance warring with the undeniable logic of her plan. He gave her the name of the man, a retired stockyard clerk named Peters, and a small pouch of coins, nearly all the cash he had left. The next day, she took the buckboard and drove, not to Redemption, but east to the county seat. It was a larger, more anonymous town. She spent 2 days there, a ghost in a plain dress. At the Hall of Records, she was just another woman searching for a forgotten deed. No one paid her any mind. She found what she was looking for. The original survey map from 1853, when the county was first chartered. It showed the Broken Rock property and the easement, and it included a surveyor's note, a detail that had been omitted from every subsequent map. The easement was not just a right-of-way. It was designated as a cattle and water access corridor, tied not to a date, but to the continuous operation of the ranch. It could not expire as long as the Broken Rock was a working cattle ranch. Sterling's entire legal argument was built on a lie of omission. Then she found Mr. Peters. He was an old man with a sharp memory and a long-held grudge against Sterling Blackwood. He remembered the cattle sales. He remembered Sterling's doctor tallies. At first, he was reluctant to speak. Sterling was a powerful man. "Silas Blackwood is a good man," Alara said, her voice quiet and earnest. "Sterling is trying to ruin him. He burned his barn. He's trying to steal his land. All we have is the truth. Will you help us?" Peters looked at her, at the desperate honesty in her eyes. He thought of Silas's father, a man who had always dealt straight. He made his decision. He would not give a sworn statement. He was too afraid for that, but he gave her something better. His own private records, a small notebook where he had documented the true counts of every sale Sterling had managed for the past 5 years. The discrepancy was staggering. It was tens of thousands of dollars. She returned to the Broken Rock 2 days before the hearing, clutching a roll of copied maps and the old clerk's precious notebook. She felt like a spy returning from behind enemy lines. The day of the hearing dawned bright and clear. The town hall in Redemption was packed. It seemed the entire county had turned out for the final act of the drama. The room buzzed with gossip and speculation. Alara saw the same faces that had been at the auction, the same smirks, the same judgmental eyes. Sterling Blackwood sat at a table at the front of the room with his lawyer, a slick, well-dressed man from the city. Sterling looked confident, relaxed. He nodded to people in the crowd, the picture of a concerned citizen and community pillar. Silas sat at the other table, alone. He wore his best, threadbare suit. He looked worn and tired, a man already defeated. The crowd saw him as a failure, a man who had lost his ranch and was now about to lose his land. Alara was not at the table. She sat in the first row of public seating directly behind Silas. She was just a woman in the crowd, insignificant, invisible, exactly as she had planned. The county commissioner, a man named Henderson who was known to be friendly with Sterling, called the hearing to order. Sterling's lawyer stood up and laid out their case. He was eloquent and persuasive. He presented the modern map, showing the easement. He cited the legal statute about abandoned rights-of-way. He spoke of progress, of a need to put the land to better, more productive use. He painted a picture of Silas as a man clinging to the past, unable to manage his own affairs, letting a valuable community asset lie fallow. The Broken Rock Ranch, the lawyer concluded with a dismissive wave of his hand, is, for all intents and purposes, no longer a viable operation. The easement has, by any reasonable definition, been abandoned. Commissioner Henderson nodded gravely. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, turning to Silas, "do you have a response?" Silas stood up. He looked out at the hostile, expectant faces of his neighbors. He looked at the ruin of his life being laid out as a legal argument. "The Broken Rock is my home," he said, his voice rough. "My father built it. I'm not abandoning it." The crowd shifted restlessly. It was a pathetic, emotional plea, not a legal argument. Sterling's lawyer smiled. "With all due respect, Mr. Blackwood, sentiment is not a legal deed. Do you have any evidence to refute our claim?" Silas was silent for a moment. He looked lost. The crowd began to whisper. It was over. Then he said, "I don't, but she does." He turned and looked directly at Alara. Every head in the room swiveled to follow his gaze. They saw the plain, fat woman from the orphanage. A wave of confusion and derisive murmurs swept the room. Was this a joke? Sterling's confident smile faltered. He stared at Alara, a look of genuine shock on his face. Alara stood up. She felt the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on her. It was the auction platform all over again. The same shame, the same fear threatened to swallow her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her hands were cold and slick with sweat. She looked at Silas. He gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of complete, unconditional trust. It was all she needed. She walked to the front of the room, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. She did not go to the table. She stood in the open space between the two parties, directly in front of the commissioner. "My name is Alara," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "I handle the accounts for the Broken Rock Ranch. She unrolled the copy of the 1853 survey map and laid it on the commissioner's desk. "This is the original charter survey for this county," she said. "As you can see, the easement is designated as a cattle and water access corridor. According to the surveyor's notes, its existence is contingent not on a date, but on the continuous operation of the ranch it serves. The Broken Rock is still a working ranch. Therefore, the easement cannot legally expire." A stunned silence fell over the room. Sterling's lawyer rushed forward to look at the map, his face pale. Sterling half rose from his chair, his mask of charm utterly gone. This is an antique document," the lawyer sputtered. "It has no bearing on modern property law." "On the contrary," Alara said, her voice gaining strength. "It is the founding document of every property deed in this room. It supersedes any subsequent map that omits its details." She looked at Commissioner Henderson. "The petition to review the easement is based on a false premise. It is legally invalid." Henderson stared at the map, his face grim. He knew she was right. But Alara was not finished. "The question is not whether the easement has been abandoned," she said, her voice rising, filling the room. "The question is why. Why is the Broken Rock Ranch struggling? The answer to that is also in the numbers." She turned to Sterling. "For 5 years, you have been systematically defrauding your own cousin. You have inflated invoices for feed and supplies. You have skimmed money from his cattle sales. You have bled his ranch dry, all so you could buy it for pennies on the dollar after you had ruined him. This is an outrage." Sterling roared, finding his voice. He shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. "These are slanderous accusations from a worthless, half-wit orphan, a fat girl my cousin picked up out of the gutter." The room gasped. It was his fatal mistake. The raw, ugly contempt in his voice, the vitriol of his words, it was a confession. He had just confirmed every accusation she had made, not with facts, but with the undeniable truth of his character. He had shown them all the man he really was. Alara did not flinch. She met his furious gaze with a look of calm, cold certainty. "I may be an orphan," she said, her voice dropping to a steely quiet, "and I may have been picked up from the gutter, but I can count." She held up the small, worn notebook. Mr. Peters's notebook. "This is a record," she said, "kept by the stockyard clerk of every head of cattle you sold for the Broken Rock. And this," she said, holding up a sheaf of papers from her bag, "is a copy of the bank deposits you made. Over 5 years, the difference between what you sold and what you deposited comes to $22,450. She let the number hang in the dead silent room. It was a fortune. "You didn't just want to buy his ranch, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice ringing with the force of irrefutable truth. "You wanted him to pay you to steal it. She had him. She had done it. She had dismantled him, piece by piece, with nothing but numbers and the truth." Sterling stared at her, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. He was ruined, and he had been ruined by the one person in the world he had considered to be beneath his notice. The silence was broken by a single sound. Someone in the back of the room began to clap, then another, and another. Soon, the entire room was filled with the sound of applause. The townspeople, the same ones who had laughed at her and whispered about her, were applauding her. They were not applauding a victim. They were applauding a victor. G1. The sound of the applause washed over Alara, a wave of noise so foreign it was disorienting. She had stood on the auction block in this same town under the gaze of these same people, and their sound had been laughter. Now it was this, a roar of approval, of vindication. She felt a hand on her back, a light, steadying pressure. It was Silas. He had come to stand beside her, not in front of her, not shielding her, but supporting her. He did not say a word. He did not need to. His presence was a silent testament to their shared victory. Commissioner Henderson, his face a mixture of shock and reluctant admiration, banged his gavel. "Order! Order!" The room quieted. He looked at Sterling, whose face had collapsed into a mask of disbelief and fury. He looked at the evidence Alara had laid out, the map, the numbers. The truth was undeniable. In light of this information, Henderson said, his voice heavy. The petition to review the easement is dismissed. The original charter stands. He cleared his throat, avoiding Sterling's murderous glare. And I believe this is now a matter for the sheriff. The town sheriff, a stout man who had been watching from the back, stepped forward. He walked to Sterling's table. Sterling Blackwood, he said, his voice devoid of its usual deference. I think you'd better come with me. We have a lot to talk about. As the sheriff led a stunned and sputtering Sterling from the room, the townspeople erupted again, this time with cheers. Men who had turned their backs on Silas now rushed forward to clap him on the shoulder, to offer him credit, to promise him help rebuilding his barn. They looked at Alara with a new kind of respect, a kind of awe. She was no longer the orphan, the fat girl, the charity case. She was the woman who had faced down Sterling Blackwood and won. Alara felt overwhelmed. She wanted to shrink back into the shadows, but Silas's hand remained on her back, a warm, solid anchor in the swirling chaos of the crowd. They made their way outside, into the clean afternoon air. Jed and Finn were waiting, their faces split by wide, incredulous grins. "You did it, girl," Jed said, his voice thick with emotion. He actually tipped his hat to her. "By God, you did it." Finn just stared at her, his eyes wide with hero worship. "You were amazing, ma'am." Alara could only nod, the words stuck in her throat. The praise felt as strange and uncomfortable as the ridicule had. Silas led her away from the celebrating crowd, toward the quiet of the buckboard. They stood beside it, the sounds of the town hall fading behind them. The silence between them was no longer heavy or suspicious. It was calm. It was easy. "They see you now," Silas said quietly, looking back toward the town. "They see a winner," she corrected him, her voice still shaky. "Tomorrow, they might see something else. Their opinion doesn't matter. It matters that the truth was told," he said. He turned to face her, his blue eyes serious. "You gave me back my name, Alara. More than that. You saved my home." "We saved it," she said, instinctively correcting him. "No," he said, his voice firm. "I was ready to give up." "You weren't." He took a deep breath, as if gathering his courage for something difficult. "The broken rock, it's not just mine anymore. It's yours, too." Alara's heart stuttered. "I work for wages, Silas. I'm owed nothing." "This isn't about what you're owed," he said. "This is about what you've earned. You're a part of that land now. You brought it back to life." He hesitated, choosing his words with the same care he had used in the alleyway all those weeks ago. "I've been to a lawyer. I'm having the deed redrawn. Half of the broken rock. It's yours. Free and clear." She stared at him, speechless. Land. Her own land. It was a concept so vast, so impossible, she could not wrap her mind around it. It was a home. A permanent place. "I can't accept that," she whispered. It was too much. It was a debt she could never repay. "It is not a gift," he said, his gaze intense. "It is a fact. The ranch would not exist without you. Therefore, half of it belongs to you." He looked away, toward the horizon, as if the next words were even harder. "And I'm not asking you to marry me. I'm not asking you for anything. This is not a transaction." He looked back at her, his expression stripped bare of all artifice. "But I'm asking you to stay. Not as my housekeeper, not as my bookkeeper, as my partner. In the ranch. In everything." He faltered for a moment. "Stay because you choose to. Because this is your home now, if you want it to be." He had offered her everything. Not just land, not just a home, but a choice. The one thing she had never had. The freedom to choose her own place in the world. The vow she had made, the vow to be alone, to trust no one, felt like a distant memory from another person's life. It had been a shield, but a shield is also a cage. It keeps the bad out, but it also keeps the good from getting in. She looked at his face, at the quiet strength and unwavering decency in his eyes. She thought of the clean kitchen, the running creek, the feel of the key to her own room in her hand. She thought of the word "we." This was not a trap. This was a foundation. "I'll stay," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it held the weight of a final, irrevocable decision. She looked at him, and for the first time, she let a small, genuine smile touch her lips. "But I'm not a very good partner. I'm bossy." and I insist on balancing the books myself. A slow smile spread across Silas's face, transforming his weary features. It was the first time she had ever seen him truly smile, and it was like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. "I'm counting on it," he said. They climbed into the wagon and began the long drive home. They did not speak much. They did not need to. A new kind of silence settled between them, a silence not of strangers, but of partners. A silence that was full of the promise of shared work, shared struggles, and a shared future. When they reached the rise that overlooked the ranch, Silas pulled the horses to a stop. Below them, the small house and the charred ruins of the barn sat in the warm light of the setting sun. It was not a grand or beautiful vista. It was a place of hardship, of struggle, of scars. But it was theirs. Alara looked at the land stretching out before her. Her land. She felt a sense of belonging so profound it was a physical ache in her chest. She had not been given a home. She had built one. Silas reached across the seat, his hand covering hers where it rested on the worn wood. His hand was calloused and rough, the hand of a man who worked the earth. It was a simple, grounding touch, an acknowledgement, a promise. She did not pull away. She turned her hand over and laced her fingers through his. Together, they watched the last of the sun dip below the horizon, casting long, peaceful shadows over the broken rock. Their home.